Spectre, Spectre. The film is so yellow, looks like it's covered in nectar. I wanna see Bond on a mission instead of a web that his brother has spun. From Casino Royale to Skyfall, looks like Blofeld was behind it all. A license to kill is also a license not to kill. Everything or Nothing sequel presents Spectre. I'm Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Unlike C, I don't have poor taste in friends. So with me today is Michael Shantz of the How Dare You Awards. We're back discussing 6 Bond films that could be considered continuing sequels rather than standalone adventures every other month in 2022, with a 2015 Daniel Craig outing directed by the author of my pain, Sam Mendes, who made his series debut with Skyfall. This isn't the Hoffler Clinic, so we do serve alcohol. Today's tipple is a dirty martini. Made
Yours is a little more dirty than mine.
That's right, yeah. Well, mine is also a cheat because I used American gin instead of Russian vodka. But it's aviation in honor of the film's many and varied airborne action sequences. Aside from lifting the plot of Goldmember, Spectre is also famous for having no solid food. So I'm cutting out the middleman with a green smoothie.
With the green smoothie, nice.
In lieu of the toilet-bound digestive enzyme shake.
I was hoping I would have enough time to try to get a green smoothie available to you.
On first sip, I think Bond made the right call.
Yeah.
So here we are, talking about Spectre. We're this is supposed to be our final episode. It's now our penultimate episode.
That's correct.
Crowbar in Moonraker, and maybe a sort of a light discussion of Moonraker, maybe a wrap-up episode as well. And we could talk about No Time to Die, and
I was gonna say, because is the main reason we're not talking about No Time to Die for this because we already talked about it once?
Well, yeah, I think we can.
If there was a direct sequel,
I'm planning on in December doing an all-purpose wrap-up episode.
All right.
Which will, we need to talk about Moonraker. Let's talk about how we now feel about No Time to Die.
Yeah.
And let's just wrap up,
our James Bond year.
Our miniseries, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're debuting this episode on October 26th. And normally we do watch-alongs on the date on which the film is released, but we try and pick a significant date in Bond history to release this episodes of this series. This time we cut out the middleman once again because October 26th is the actual release date of Spectre.
Wow.
So yeah, the cosmos came together. We didn't know we'd be doing it in October, and yet that's when the movie was released.
That's fantastic.
I'll go you one better, 2 better, in fact.
Yeah.
Both Quantum of Solace and Skyfall were released in their respective years within a week of this date.
Wow.
And it's fair to say that October in the Bond canon is Daniel Craig month.
Right.
He was named as Bond on October the 14th. And all the Craig Bond films are October releases. And October 7th was his infamous pre-publicity Spectre interview where he said he'd rather slit his wrist than play James Bond again.
Correct.
Before embarking on No Time to Die. So there you go.
Just a short 6 years later.
Yeah. So while this may be one of the more grueling movies that we've tackled on this series, we should absolutely be doing it in October. There's no universe is telling us that that's where we should be.
Well, and I would personally like to thank you up front for mentioning how yellow this movie is, because I've mentioned it, I don't know, no fewer than 6 times, I'm sure, on other James Bond episodes and other podcast episodes we've done, as to how much I don't like it.
Yeah, it's very egregious. And it's I don't know how deliberate it is, whether it was just
it feels deliberate though, but the thing for me is that I can't think of a reason why.
just general gold is a thing in Bond, so let's make everything gold. I mean, I I'm trying to think. I'm trying to walk in Sam Mendes' shoes, which is
now what is it? I know you're going to have questions for me mostly, but what is the nature of your hatred of Sam Mendes?
Hatred's a strong word.
Okay.
And I think I've said this before. I never seen any of his theater productions. I'm perfectly willing to believe he's the theater director that everyone says he is, but he just has absolutely no business filmmaking.
You've seen no Sam Mendes movie that you like?
No, or nothing that convinces me this is the medium he should be working through. I think he over relies on his cinematographers to make his films look good, and his ability to handle composition and framing and editing is like looks very amateurish to me, and he's probably the last person I'd want to direct the Bond film. But as I said before, I find this I have a particular problem with Skyfall, and this movie I don't particularly enjoy, but I don't have any massive beef against it.
Okay.
And I think I confided to you off mic, if you're going to watch this movie and you're not already invested in it, bring a drink. Right?
Yeah.
I had a couple of gin and tonics during.
I took your advice. It helped.
It really helps. Yeah,
I enjoyed this viewing more than any other viewing of this movie.
Yeah, have one at the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
Should carry you through to about the halfway point.
Because it's a fucking long movie.
I didn't realize how close it was in length to No Time to Die. Like,
wow.
Like, everyone made a huge thing, including myself.
Yeah, I was gonna say you.
And by everyone, I mean just me. It's the Donald Trump everyone. It's like, right. Everyone, I mean just me. Of how long No Time to Die is, but it's only 15 minutes longer than this.
Yeah.
So I guess we all collectively forgot that the Bond films were kind of the Daniel Craig films have gone all over the place, haven't they? Because Casino Royale is one of the longest. Quantum of Solace is the shortest.
Yeah.
I don't know what Skyfall is, but Spectre and No Time to Die are two of the longest as well. So it's kind of interesting. Uneven, which is
right.
A pretty good adjective for the canon as a whole, I'd say. So there we are. That's why we're doing it today. Why do we call this a sequel? I've got some continuity claims for you, and
we see Vesper Lynd's name.
I've got that. That's one of them. Yes. We can cross that off the list. Well, I mean, in relation to what we talk about on the Everything Sequel podcast quite a lot, this is a Skyfall aftermath sequel. Parts of the story are set in the ruins of the MI6 building, which was up in the previous film.
A dead person's. We're gonna see it. We won't see photos, but we will see a video.
Of a dead person. And M's putting M's death in canon. And we actually see the burnt out remains of Skyfall. So we have the remains of two buildings from the previous film.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, this film retcons Javier Bardem's Silva as a Spectre agent.
Well, all of them.
All of them. Well, this is, but specifically in relation to Skyfall.
Right.
That's how That's how closely these.
But it makes it, it furthers the argument towards sequel, because now it's a sequel to all of them.
Right.
Because they're all Lashif. I mean, everybody we've dealt with has been a member of Spectre.
Right. Because Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Green and Lashif both turn out to be Spectre agents. Mr. White returns, who we haven't seen since Quantum of Solace. And you mentioned, of course, the Vesper videotape, which is sort of strategically shelved
right
by Bond. I don't know whether they knew they were going to spend the next movie dealing with that, but at the time I had a sort of, well, I guess I thought two ways. I thought, if they're smart, that'll be the last time Vesper will be mentioned. But so it was like a Last Jedi moment, where it's like, if they're smart, Rey's parents will be nobodies. They'll keep it that way. But of course, you sort of know that they will inevitably undo that in the next movie, and that's exactly what they did. Whereas a lot of that film is about Vesper. So yeah, and I guess bringing all those elements together, this all happens in one reveal.
Right.
Blofeld's master plan it reveals all the Daniel Craig films as part of a continuing storyline, which is Blofeld's behind-the-scenes revenge plot against his half-brother.
Yeah.
No, he's not even a half-brother, step-brother.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Half-step-brother.
Half-brother in your heart.
Yeah. Basically, Blofeld's dad taught James Bond how to ski.
And that was too much to bear.
Oh, I mean, it destroyed him. He went off and formed an international terrorist organization.
Talk about overcompensating.
Yeah. It's not a great commercial for a blended family.
Yes, right.
So those are all my continuity claims. I don't know if you noticed anything else, but I mean, that's
I mean, you've hit the, you've listed all the ones that I certainly noticed, but it also, there's something with there was something strange within it. And it's funny because we've talked in the past about the Spectre storyline and how they couldn't have Spectre because of you'll know the name of the writer. Who was the writer that won his lawsuit?
Kevin McClory.
Yeah,
who
correct.
won the original lawsuit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
And so it just feels like the franchise had been waiting for this moment for so long. And I just thought it was interesting watching this movie that, having waited so long, it feels like the filmmakers think they made everything come together like perfect puzzle pieces. And it doesn't feel like that. It feels like a retrofit. And it feels retcon.
Retrofit, yeah. And yet they will claim in interviews, George Lucas style, that they planned it all along.
Yeah, correct. But it's funny to think about that also in terms of No Time to Die, because No Time to Die, in terms of Madeline and, the weight given to their relationship and that character, it makes it feel like she's been along with so many more of these movies as opposed to just this movie.
And well, for half of the film as well. I mean,
she doesn't show up until half of the film. And obviously this is skipping way ahead, but there's a moment in a torture scene where she is proclaiming love for James Bond. And my first thought, of course, is, really?
Yeah, too soon.
Why?
Yeah.
It's not earned, It's
definitely
from
not
a storytelling standpoint, it was not earned. There's no reason for me to believe that these two people love each other. And so it's funny to see that as well. Anyway.
Well, and picking up on what you're saying, like the it's now interesting that we can read Spectre through what happens in No Time to Die.
Yeah, right.
Because, she does.
She mentions
I've never
the house.
noticed. and I've never noticed, but in the I didn't. Well, obviously, it's the first time I've seen it since I watched No Time to Die. In one of the train compartment scenes, Madeline, she's Madeline White. What's her Swan? Swan. Yeah, she took her mother's name.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Well, she's Madeline White, Madeline Swan. She basically
White Swan Bond.
She pitches the cold open to the next film.
Yeah, right.
And I think that really helped me connect the dots. But as you say, nothing in this movie is done to kind of earn where they are at the beginning of the next film.
Right.
But actually, when we can maybe talk about this next time, but I think No Time to Die does a great job of sort of convincing us these two have been together for a lot longer than they have.
I agree with that.
This movie doesn't know quite how to bring them together in a way other than a normal Bond girl would be attached to Bond. And I think that's
because the moment of conception, like the moment that they actually come together, felt very old school James Bond.
That's it. And I think those two things are
like, what do we do now? Our lives were just in jeopardy. What do we do now? Well, we have sex.
That's sex.
What we do.
Yeah.
And
I think that is my overall note for this film is that the kind of retro 60s 70s Bond and the Daniel Craig era in this film are kind of fighting against each other.
They're graining though. Yeah.
And that's a really good example of that where we want him to have a committed relationship with a woman, but we also want him to have a Bond girl sidekick throughout the film in the way that they did in the 60s and 70s. And I don't necessarily know if you can make both of those things happen simultaneously.
Yeah, because there are moments where this movie really strains. There's a moment where she has a conversation with him where she's saying, "I'm going with you." Yeah. And he says, "No," like that's and his answer should be his answer. Like there's no reason for you to go. It's too dangerous.
Yeah.
They try to cover it with, she knows how to hold a gun and empty its clip, but like that's not enough for him to bring her on his mission. Anyway, so
no,
I think a lot of this movie is straining within the script for the characters to make the decisions that they make.
Agreed. Let's start before the beginning with this cold open.
Oh, I thought you were going to start. I thought you were going to start even before that. Knowing you, I thought you were going to say, "Why are we coming out of the eyeball of the MGM logo?" The MGM logo is a classic logo. Just leave it alone.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's a great. Well, now we don't need to talk about it because that should be the final word.
There you go.
Leave that lion alone. Leave the long dead lion alone.
Right.
Fantastic. Yeah. Then
you get classic gun barrel.
Yeah,
which the Bond, the Daniel Craig Bonds, they're playing fast and loose with that most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the first time we get the gun barrel at the beginning of the film in a Daniel Craig film proper.
Yeah,
we've had it at the end. We've had a version of it in live action. Or two versions of it in live action. With Skyfall, it's him walking into focus with a gun.
Oh, okay. And, the cold open of Casino Royale. Yeah.
So that's interesting as well. Like, and my feeling was, it's kind of quite legitimate and authentic. Like this movie's quite good of giving you the veneer of a traditional Bond film.
Right.
I mean, it's all cosmetic.
Yeah.
But it's good cosmetics. Like it's sort of like there are moments in this film where you feel like you're in a 60s, 70s Bond movie without having to strain and without having to sort of unfocus your eyes. Like you can actually feel like it. And then there's other moments where that is harder. That effect is harder to pull off.
Well,
But this
I
is
think
one of
in
the-
general it feels, because I think you're right, but I think in general it feels hard to pull off because the scale of the movie is bigger than that.
Mm, mm.
You know, it not
Trying to
obviously.
I mean, they're definitely trying to do too much in terms of story and
yeah,
and scope.
scope. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
But we start with an inscription.
Mhm.
The dead are alive. That was me doing it in real time. What did you think? What did you think? I can't think of it. There's no other Bond movie that begins this way.
No, yeah.
In my memory. Is this a step too far? And does it come across as pretentious, or what do you? I mean,
Yeah, that was kind of I had two feelings, because I had a feeling about that and a pretentious bit within the filmmaking itself, because as we start following these at least one masked character, and I don't know about you, but the first time you saw this movie, did you think it was James Bond, or did you think we were following a villain?
That Daniel Craig's body is so
square, like so.
Yeah, it's so specific that I get, if it were any other were his body not so was not, if his body wasn't such a giveaway, I probably would have done, but not in this context. No, I mean the mask, it's kind of like Nightmare Before Christmas. The mask looks more like his face than his actual face.
He might take issue with that, sir.
He might. I mean, it's a great. I think there's an element. There is definitely an element of that. But in terms of filmmaking, you see.
Well,
him
so yeah, what I was going to say was the tracking shot.
Yeah, you see him at the edge of the frame, and it's like they're trying to, they're sort of offsetting his entrance.
Well, it just feels to me, it feels like so many filmmakers. I mean, he did a whole movie like this with 1917, but so many filmmakers today are trying to do what Scorsese did in 1990 with Goodfellas. But Scorsese was telling you something about the character while he was doing that. So
it goes back
for other filmmakers, it just feels like, look at this thing we can do.
Oh, well,
I feel like it has purpose.
Yeah, the other precedent that I thought of, and musically it's very similar, is the opening of Orson Welles' Touch of Evil.
Yes, yeah.
And it's very the Henry Mancini score there, I think, is being aped a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I thought that the long take was. It's really interesting. You're right. Like Sam Mendes has gone on to do a whole movie like this.
Right.
But yeah, his precedents would be something like Goodfellas or Touch of Evil, and
Touch of Evil. Because Touch of Evil was actually that was inspiration for the beginning of Halloween for John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. You know,
again, that is a great example of not that we need to talk more about the Halloween franchise
right
on this podcast, but that's another great example of like using an unbroken take for a specific reason, in a way that establishes the world. And I mean, I remember, I don't mind it so much now, but I remember when I first saw it, I thought, why?
Yeah, right. That's my thought.
Why is this in a Bond film? Like, why? What is it adding?
Why is it in a Bond film? And
because you haven't done it before.
Because that was my other. What is it adding to this scene?
But I actually prefer it I prefer that bit of the cold open to the other half of the cold open these days.
Yeah, I mean, I do too, actually. Yeah, because the second half of that cold open is it's funny because my note on this watching was, oh, they're trying to recreate the train scene from Russia with Love, which then they do later in this movie anyway. Yeah.
But I was thinking of, it's the skipping ahead a little bit, not too much. The everything to do with the helicopter is sort of like if you mash together the cold opens of GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies, which, you know, I love GoldenEye, and I love that whole, you know, pulling up.
Oh, it's great.
It's great, but it's exactly the same, and it's combined with the, you know, the hurt acting Brosnan from Tomorrow Never Dies. So you're diluting it, and you're also,
well, and also it's like
it's way too early to be making that callback.
Right.
Cold open.
Right. And also for me, just from a physical space standpoint, you know, you have a pilot, you have the guy he's chasing. He kicks the guy he's chasing out, and then there's supposed to be a second half to that fight. But because it's the pilot, all you can do is Bond trying to strangle him, and then Bond being thrown against the wall. And they repeat that like 3 times.
Yeah.
So it just becomes boring.
Yeah, it becomes,
and you don't want your action set piece at the front of a cold open of a Bond movie to be boring.
Yeah, it's like, it's whenever Daniel Craig's in a plane, that's the time to go take a piss, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
You know, it's going to go on longer than it should, and it's not going to be the best action sequence in the film.
And again, just like I was just saying before, it's not the only time they're going to do that in this movie. He's going to be in another plane.
There's conservatively 2 more airborne action sequences. I mean, what to me it looks like looking at it now, it looks like, you know, 2 totally separate sequences welded together. Like I don't see what and it would have, I think it would have underlined the, you know, the endeavor of doing a long take if you made that completely the cold open. Like if you'd have ended on if you'd have ended when the long take was, it would have kind of underlined it in a way that cutting away to a more traditional yet less interesting version of the cold open did in the film.
Yeah.
Like you could sort of literally cut this in half with no great loss and it would make the movie shorter. Because you achieve the same narrative goals. The other thing that struck me was again, like we're foregrounding a lot of classic Bond references. So, you know, it was made a huge part of in the trailer, The Mask. Because, you know, everyone thought, oh, is Baron Samedi coming back? You know, because it's so like that from Live and Let Die. The Carnival is very, you know, is straight out of Thunderball.
So I also, on this viewing, because I had remembered that, you know, this movie comes out in 2015, and maybe 6 months before that, Fury Road had come out. And there's one particular shot of the carnival with people up on kind of parts of the floats that felt very Fury Road to me. And I kept thinking, had they already seen the preview and tried to kind of glom onto that in some way?
It could well be.
Anyway.
And then, you know, the titles look like a perfume commercial to me.
I hate everything about it.
Yeah.
I hated that song. I couldn't believe, because I had forgotten it. I mean, it's utterly forgettable to me.
It is utterly forgettable.
And so seeing it again, I thought, man, how did this pass? Sorry, Sam Smith.
Well, my theory is, and this leads into another talking point, is, you know, we wanted Skyfall was such a success, we wanted to double down on our predecessor.
Yeah.
And this is a mistake that Bond films often make. You know, it's like Spy Who Loves Me comes out, rescues the franchise. We go and make Moonraker, which is in essence the same film with lasers, right? Instead of submarines. You know, Quantum of Solace is part of the set. It's like, oh, people are really invested in the Casino Royale story, so let's continue that on. And it almost never works.
Right.
And I think I think they were just like, let's have another white soul ballad as our title.
Right.
But you know, then like when Adele is the most kind of color that you have, the most, you know, it's sort of like it just gets wider and wider. Like the next one is like it's white music that doesn't even have like a soul flare. It's just pure like emo white. So I think, you know, it starts off a very dangerous precedent in the series. And I think it is part of this tendency to, you know, the sequel remake quality here, where we're trying to double down as much as we can on what we saw in Skyfall and the film.
What we think you like.
Yeah, what we think you like. And the film, I would say, I don't know how you feel about this, kind of lives in Skyfall's shadow in a way that isn't very helpful to it as you know, keeping it memorable and individual.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I've seen this movie 4 or 5 times maybe now, and in between each time I always forget what has happened in this movie. And because there are, I mean, this movie has like 4 climaxes, but because one of those climaxes takes place in a desert, which is also feels so much like Quantum of Solace, I easily confuse the two.
I mean, wouldn't that have been a way better ending?
Yeah.
Because nothing sort of change. I hate to say this, nothing sort of changes from that point to the end of the movie in any significant way.
Except that he's alive. Except that Blofeld's alive.
Right, but you know.
But you could have handled that in the next film anyway without.
Yeah.
You know.
And
he could have had the same eye.
I think that I know we're hugely skipping ahead, but that final 20 minutes in London to me is really about doubling down on Skyfall and big, you know, all the characters that were introduced in Skyfall, the London, like foregrounding the London setting, as the centerpiece of your finale.
But it all falls so flat for me. I mean,
well, because it's old news, right? And it's narratively unnecessary, and it's really there to sort of remind you of how much everyone enjoyed Skyfall, and seems to have no other purpose really.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess we're done.
Now that we've talked about the end of the movie, good night, everyone.
So let's talk about this. Well, we've mentioned it a few times now because, you know, this movie is very much about the cosmetics of 60s, 70s Connery, Moore, Bond. You know, Mr. Hinks is your classic oversized henchman. The return of Spectre, who are associated with the late 60s, early 70s Bond.
The Hinks part was an especially big strain for me. I mean, they're trying so hard to get an odd job.
Well, they want an odd job. They want a Jaws. They want a Donovan Grant, which is, they already have a Donovan Grant in the film. It's Daniel Craig. Playing it the most Donovan Grant that he will ever play the role. There's On Her Majesty's Secret Service, you know, the Alpine Clinic, clearly taken from that. Ejector seats, comedy foreigners, you know, there's like want they're trying to establish a veneer of that kind of Bond film, but it's enjoyable in parts, but it does strike me as very hollow. Like it
feels
hollow,
paper thin.
Like a really hollow reproduction of that style. That doesn't fit Daniel Craig, that doesn't fit the kind of Bond movies that
they're making for him. Doesn't even really fit Sam Mendes himself. Like what he was doing with Skyfall. So
do you think that they thought of it as a kind of a part of the character arc, that at this point, because, you know, the starting, they very much made it clear in Casino Royale that the way that Daniel Craig was playing it there was the starting point, and that he would grow from that. Are they trying to sort of make him kind of use the Connery Moore stuff to try and put him in a more relaxed environment, to sort of give him the idea that he's loosening up. I mean, this doesn't work, and Daniel Craig's not up for the challenge.
Yeah, right.
But, he's not up for this, but they do certain things in the film that suggest to me that they want you to see Bond as kind of growing into the suave, like the suave comedic,
right,
relaxed late Connery, early Roger Moore.
When he gets his watch and asks, "Does it do anything?"
Well, the part for me where they seem to be starting this idea is in the cold open when he lands on the couch.
Yeah.
From a great height. And
yeah, I have a note about that. Like, I mean, it's because I had the same question basically. I thought, is this still a throwback? Is it just a joke? Is it trying to do more than just the joke? Basically, is what I was wondering.
But I mean, it's a moment that could be straight out of The Spy Who Loved Me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or Octopussy or one of those Roger Moore
Octopussy,
films.
right?
But there's an uneasiness about it because it is Daniel Craig, and it's really. I remember, specifically when this was discussed on the James Bonding podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Gawley, you said, because this is Daniel Craig, he should miss the sofa. We should think he's heading for the sofa, and he should just land on the ground and dust himself off. And it's like, yeah, but I think the film
roughly
the film is sort of saying, at this point he should be settling into the suave, relaxed James Bond archetype.
Yeah,
and
but
Daniel Craig's not really going with that. I mean, he has the cuffs, right?
It's crazy to even say that because we're the 4th movie in out of 5 movies for that actor.
Yeah,
we're at the end. We're careening towards the end.
And this could.
So to try to start that now sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud.
And to me, like whenever he wants to suggest that he's being suave, he does the cuffs.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I'm not sold on that as a sort of like I don't. Roger Moore does the eyebrows and sort of the adjustment of the tie, and for some reason the cuffs is always Daniel Craig's go-to for
suave.
For like I've just been through a action sequence, but my suit is immaculate, and but it doesn't. It just seems like a nervous.
Yeah,
it seems like a nervous tick rather than a choice.
And it's funny because a lot of this movie is peppered with that kind of thing, and it almost always feels out of place. But the thing that I think works, that I noticed a lot on this movie, to me, it was more Daniel Craig's James Bond sense of duty to country.
Interesting.
And I actually really enjoyed that on this viewing.
Wow.
Because, you have this moment with him and M at the office after the cold open, and he's kind of getting chastised and being told the nature of his job and what he should be doing. And I kind of like that he's giving this veneer of, in that moment of, yes, sir, absolutely. I get what you're saying, but you realize that he's shining him on. And even M in the scene realizes he's shining him on. And you realize a short time later that he's doing this all for the previous M, for Judi Dench. But it's like in his mind, you can see the through line. You can see that, but he's got to ask for help. He's got to get help from the Scooby Gang. And then at a certain point, they all kind of coalesce to his side.
Yeah.
They realize he's been right all along. And so when M opens up the door to the burned out MI6 and Bond's just sitting there, I really like the moment where he says, "It's good to have you back, Bond." And he just says, "Sir." It's like he was vindicated. He was right the whole time. So his sense of duty to his country, I kind of like that in this movie. I liked that kind of shined through for me in a way that this other stuff doesn't work. The peppering of this, to the essential bones of Craig's Bond, of his character.
but it's interesting. I really like what you're saying, and I think that's definitely what they're going for. And I think you're right. Some of it does come through, but the ending of Skyfall is pretty much a promise that the next time we see Bond, he's going to go on a self-contained mission, right?
Yeah.
That
Right.
we're done with. We're at the beginning of Doctor No, right? This is
Mhm.
1962. It's time for him to be going on missions. And it's just a little frustrating that the first thing we see is him going rogue and him being chewed out by M for going rogue.
Yeah, I guess I gave it a pass
with,
because his rogueness was connected to previous M. So to me, it still felt like duty, like it was, he had been given a mission by that M.
But he really should be doing something.
But he should, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And well, it's the fact that we go from, it starts with him being rogue and it ends with him resigning. That it's sort of like, for this series to sort of go somewhere narratively, especially when Skyfall suggests to you that we're stripping away the the storytelling of the previous two films, and we're going more in, we're gonna the next film is going to be the most conventional of these Bond films, which it is in many ways. For you then to go back into the same, he's a renegade and he's going to retire. I mean, it saddles the movie a little. It sort of weighs down the movie a little bit.
Now, why does it weigh it down though?
Well, I mean, is the problem is not necessarily, well, except that, I mean, I think there was an implicit promise at the end of Skyfall. It's like,
okay, yeah, right.
We're going to get, we're going to see Bond on a mission rather than another kind of emotional journey that he has to go through. But besides that, the movie is trying to become a more conventional mission type Bond movie, and yet it's also telling us that
right, it is trying to do both at once.
Yeah, everything that we've seen so far has been leading up to this point, and that it's a carrying through the emotionally led mission, because I don't know if it's always clear that this is Queen and Country, now King and Country, that it is Queen at the time. I do think starting off with a sort of a mission to sort of ward off the demons of having killed M in the last film. I just wish we'd have
you wanted a clean break.
This is the new M. He's your boss now.
Right.
And I thought that's where we were at the end of Spectre. And as much as
you mean at the end of Skyfall?
The end of Skyfall, yes.
Yeah.
And as much as I despise that film, that gave me hope that the next film, of course, I assumed it wouldn't be directed by Sam Mendes, was gonna sort of, that this was all really a prelude to a much more mission-oriented film that was self-contained, and in a way it is that, and in a way it's exactly the opposite of that.
Right.
And those two ideas of the film never really mesh in any significant way. We talked a little about that this is interesting in that if Eon hadn't won a court battle to get the rights back to Spectre, which had been taken away from them from Kevin McClory, who claimed that, well, he worked on a photo play version of Thunderball, which eventually became the novel Thunderball. And so he claimed he owned the rights to the novel and thereby Spectre and Blofeld and all the original elements, his Thunderball, that were created in this book.
And how did this come about? Did he give permission? Did he sell his rights?
No, I mean, I think it was just like, come on. Because all Kevin McClory could do after Never Say Never Again was, all he had the rights to do was to continue to remake Thunderball.
Right.
So there's the limited amount he can do. so really it was a matter of time and like, going to court and saying, look, we had Spectre, let's have it back. Enough is enough. And they did, and they got
so it was a judge had to say enough is enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
That you can relicense Spectre and Blofeld, because I mean that's it. Like we haven't seen Blofeld since Diamonds Are Forever, unless you count the opening of For Your Eyes Only, where he's never named as Blofeld, but is clearly Blofeld. Well, right. Never Say Never Again has Blofeld in, but only because they could.
Yeah, right.
So I guess technically the last time we saw him was Max von Sydow in Never Say Never Again, which is actually pretty fluid transition from that to Christoph Waltz, I think. So I mean that's just that's really interesting to me. It's interesting to me that the movie is called Spectre, because it's like we've not been able Spectre has been the elephant in the room for so long,
right?
Like now we're able to have Blofeld, have Spectre. We're gonna
say it out loud.
It's the centerpiece of the film,
right?
And yet it
still feels hollow to me, though.
I think, well, absolutely, I agree. Like it's still, they don't really do anything interesting with the idea of Spectre
at all.
That you don't get in so here's the Spectre trilogy. We got Thunderball, we got On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and You Only Live Twice. Those are the only books in which Blofeld and Spectre appear. He appears in implied until You Only Live Twice, and then 3 actors play him over the next 3 movies.
Right.
So it's a huge thing. And what's interesting that we've kind of known that Quantum and whatever it was that Silver was doing was standing in for Spectre, and now you actually have Spectre, and so they make a sort of strange decision to sort of say, well, it was Spectre all along.
Yeah, right.
It's like, but you've already created Quantum. You've already got a Spectre surrogate. And so their solution is it was a subsidiary of Spectre.
Well, because we've lately, with other sequels we've been talking a lot about reverse engineering. And
one of us has,
yes. But there's a line in this movie in which Blofeld says, "I am the author of all of your pain." And it feels like they started with that line and wanted to retrofit everything to fit that line.
Well, I mean, the other huge, I guess, piece of welding, there is a lot of welding in this movie.
Yeah.
The other big piece of welding is that we've got, we're taking, in literary terms, you've got the Spectre trilogy. And then they decide to make Blofeld an adjunct character of Franz Oberhauser, the son of Franz Oberhauser, who is a character who is talked about by Bond in Octopussy, the short story. So they've welded the two ideas and even in the story, Bond says he was basically my surrogate father. Yeah, so they've latched onto that. And so they've taken Blofeld from one side and Oberhauser from the other and combined them together. So in a way, it's a very, they're definitely feeding off the canon. There's also the Hildebrand antiquarian bookstore refers to a Fleming short story called The Hildebrand Rarity. So they're drawing from more than one short story, and they're drawing from, a trilogy of books within the Bond canon. But it's sort of interesting, like
but there's,
is it literally that they want a familial connection to tell the story? I mean that's how it feels. That's the thing about this movie is it feels as though they want to make it very personal for James Bond, and it never does. It feels
And it's funny because you're talking about Daniel Craig and Christoph Waltz, who are very capable actors,
Sure.
but even the actors don't seem to be able to bring that familiarity to the surface of this movie.
Right. Yeah, I know that the screenwriters from, I think, Casino Royale onwards were playing with this idea of Bond's black sheep brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they've used this opportunity of having the rights to Spectre, plus this, and they've Skyfall again. This is another element where we're doubling down on Skyfall. Skyfall started the conversation about Bond's parentage.
Yeah,
and this is like the next chapter, isn't it? What happened after his parents died?
Right.
Who looked after him? And they've gone with this Franz Oberhauser character from the Octopussy short story. So I guess it's just building on that, and the fact that they always wanted Bond to have a sort of an evil brother at some point. But again, I don't call me crazy, but I think you've got enough going on with Blofeld and Spectre.
Yeah.
And besides the fact, as I kind of hinted in the introduction, that you are essentially doing the plot of Goldmember at this point.
Yeah, right.
You know
what's interesting is
should have called out at some point.
Let me ask you this. They finally get the rights back.
Mm-hmm.
In their minds, before they start filming this movie, do you think that they thought, how many more movies do you think they thought Daniel Craig would do? Just the one, or do you think they were already thinking two?
Beyond this?
Yeah. No, I mean, including this.
What?
Because it just seems like it's late in the game for Daniel Craig for them to start this storyline.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if you wanted to do this, what you do in one movie is introduce Spectre, and in the next movie, we realize that it's his brother.
Quality aside, this would work perfectly well as Daniel Craig's last Bond film.
Yeah.
It'd be a disappointing.
It would be a disappointing end. But that was one of my big notes. When he and Madeline look at each other at the end, I thought, that's actually a fine send-off.
Yeah.
It's just that at the end of a not very good movie.
Exactly. Let's talk about Daniel Craig. So my overall take on his performance, my review of his performance is physically present, emotionally absent.
Yeah.
In a way, it's almost like he's overcommitting to the physical demands of the role, but when you look in his eyes, there's nothing behind. There's nothing going on.
It's funny because you've mentioned this before. You've mentioned this before, where you've said that he I think you said there are certain points in maybe all of his movies where he doesn't feel like he is interested in playing James Bond or something akin to that.
Yeah, definitely.
And every time you said it, I thought, I mean, if you don't like his portrayal, you don't like his portrayal. But I noticed it on this one, because the note I kept writing down was checked out.
Yeah.
He just seems checked out emotionally.
And part of that is physical exhaustion.
I think so too, because we know
doing every single
and you've
one
already,
of his stunts.
yeah. I mean, we know, and you've already said that he famously said he'd rather slit his wrist than play this role again.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was starting to actually show in performance.
Completely. And, and that's, we shouldn't dismiss the fact that, I mean, he's getting on in years, and yet he is committing to the action sequences in a way that most of his predecessors never did.
Yeah, and in a way that he probably shouldn't. I mean, before he shot,
but it really helps. I mean, in the hand-to-hand combat sequences, they're a lot more gratifying than they should be, because you can see him and Dave Bautista really going at it. That's true.
But I believe in what he did as an actor. I'm not sure I believe in what he did as a person, because we know that, I mean, he's had knee surgery, shoulder surgery. I mean, he hurt himself doing this role, to the point that his wife, when they were going to, she said, you could go back to No Time to, if you want to do one more movie, I give the okay. You're not doing all the stunts.
Mm-hmm.
Do not do all the stunts. And he couldn't. And he made that deal. And there are moments in that movie where you can see it's somebody else.
Yeah. Or his face is digitally imposed on the stuntman. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't, obviously that's not.
But I don't hold it against him because
no, absolutely. But given, I think that, and I guess the problem is like, you could, if this is Casino Royale, that would still work. If he was still at that stage of the character, it would still work. But this is when he's supposed to be loosening up, and he looks more tighter and more neurotic than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's really hard to buy those kind of Roger Moore moments that are shoehorned in of him, landing on the sofa or appearing alongside a car in a plane. All these things that like Roger Moore would have absolutely nailed.
Right.
But I think because you can't, he doesn't look relaxed or at ease at any point in the film. It's kind of
when you think of Daniel Craig's James Bond, you don't think cheeky.
No.
In the same way you do with a Roger Moore.
And that's interesting, because I think No Time to Die, Daniel Craig, is all over the place in a way that's much more interesting.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I've said it before. It's that end of term madness. Like every Bond, if you watch every Bond actor's last film, there's a little bit of crazy, apart from Lazenby, obviously, there's a little bit of craziness there. There's a little bit of I don't know, hysteria you can't quite put your finger on. But this is, I guess that is a reaction to sort of being ground down by this film, but it looks like he's being ground down as the film is being made, and as he's filming scenes, I think.
Right.
On the other hand, I want to talk about what for me is the absolute highlight of this film, which is the women.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, starting off with, because there are two Bond girls in the film, essentially. Right. Starting off with, and this is where I really bought into the film as a kind of throwback to 60s, 70s Bond. Just the mid-century European glamour of Monica Bellucci.
Sure.
As the widow, as the Sciarra widow. Like it really made me feel... It made me feel like I was in a 60s, 70s Bond film because of the type of beauty and glamour that she represents and where she's from in the world. Mm-hmm. But without any of the ethical problems surrounding that, because they've cast a woman, who was like in her early 50s, right, when this happened, which is not something you expect a Bond film to do. So it's like it's a guilt-free.
Well, and I remember hearing, I remember hearing Daniel Craig really pushing for that, and people saying, "Why'd you cast her? Like, isn't it weird to have
a woman
Monica
close to your age?"
Yeah, and he said, "Why? Because she's my fucking age." He was really offended by the question. She's one of the most beautiful women on the planet.
And I mean, and yet, she does have that air of kind of 60s, 70s European, the kind of Sophia Loren,
an elegance,
Bardot, that kind of elegance. But you doing it with a a kind of woman who has aged out of most Bond films,
right?
So it's a guilt-free pleasure.
Yeah,
but you don't have to you don't have to second guess yourself on enjoying her performance.
Right? No, not at all.
But I feel in a totally different way. I feel exactly the same way about Léa Seydoux. I think mm-hmm. her being such a good character actor, like, absolutely carries the second half.
It helps,
because she's really good. I mean, obviously that there's no way in which their relationship can seem plausible,
right?
But as a character, like, her acting really helps establish her quickly.
Yeah.
You really get a sense of who she is in a way that I think would be a struggle for an actor who wasn't as good as her.
Yeah.
Like, she just sort of, and I guess that's why we're happy to buy into the fact that they're a couple. even though the script isn't really helping us do that,
Right.
is because she's doing really good work.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you go from one time of, she's a sort of a what's the name of the actress with the cello case in The Living Daylights?
Diabo.
Yeah, she's that sort of character.
Yeah.
She's, there's like a different kind, or like From Russia with Love. What's the name? I forgot her name already.
Oh, I forgot her name.
Tiana.
Yeah.
Like she's got some. She comes to you as a character rather than a
rather than a Bond girl,
or like a film star in the way that Monica Bellucci clearly does.
Yeah.
So it's a really nice balance of acting styles, and I just think both of them absolutely knock it out of the park.
I agree.
And neither of them, I think, were safe choices.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Liz Sadu is absolutely stunning, but again, not in the conventional Bond way.
Yeah.
And I think it's, I think, yeah, it's an. I didn't realize until this viewing how important that was to making this movie watchable.
Especially with Monica Bellucci, I remember thinking that the first time I saw the movie. I gave the movie that credit the first time I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a really remarkable choice, and for a Bond film.
Yeah, definitely.
I hate to say it, but
no. I mean, the series has had real trouble with that before.
Right.
Roger Moore as Bond dating women who could have been his grandchildren.
With Tanya yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's a big deal, and yet they managed to do it. And I think the same to a greater extent in Natasha Lynch in No Time to Die. It's like you slip in the kind of a character you've not seen before.
Mm-hmm.
In a way that feels like it's always been there. And I think that's the trick with doing diversity casting in general, but just doing, putting different kinds of actors in roles that they haven't traditionally been in.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, it's unfair to Monica Bellucci, who looks as good now as she would have done in her early 20s. So
yeah.
It's not like, that is the kind of condition, right? It's like you wouldn't get someone who has not aged well.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
So there is a little bit of hypocrisy there, but still, I think it's a big deal
for a Bond film.
For the low bar of this series.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah, the only bad thing about Monica Bellucci is she always has to be bathed in gross, sickly yellow.
I'd love it if you go to Rome and everything is just naturally that yellow,
just naturally
and you realize
yellow.
There was no way to avoid it by shooting on location in Rome.
Yeah.
Like, wow, I guess they had no choice.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit. I want to specifically talk about Christoph Waltz as Blofeld.
I do too.
What are your thoughts? Because, you took, the other two, the women in this film are left field choices in some respect.
This feels like
exactly who you should be casting for this
starting pitcher. Yeah, like
maybe too obvious.
So that's what I wanted to ask you, because I can't put my thumb on what is not working about this role, because is it too on the nose? Was he not up to the task? Was the script not up to the task? What is going on? Because for me, it's not working.
Well,
because it's like they're trying to hook in.
I agree totally, and I don't quite know why. I have a few theories, but I'm not.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, and again, a lot of this just comes from my own prejudices, but I don't think there's any advantage with this particular character in trying to make him a real world villain. Like, so much of his dialogue is kind of thrown away and kind of offhand in a way that's incredible.
In those moments, they're going for comedy, and I don't know, it's like but it's not working. It's not working in this.
I don't understand why you like. Okay, well, there's two issues here. You cast Christoph Waltz. You're basically casting him on the basis of Inglourious Bastards.
I was gonna say what they're doing is they want Hans Landa.
Yeah.
And he's not Hans Landa. He's not charming. He's not menacing. He's not either of the things that you'd want this character to be.
And it was also why they cast him.
Right.
To bring that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, they didn't write.
And he's also not funny.
No. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, and I don't know what the advantage of it. I don't think any of the actors who have played Blofeld in the past have avoided melodrama in the way that they played the role.
Right.
In the way that Christoph Waltz and the screenplay does.
Right. And that's the exact note that I had, so much so that I had Mandela affected. Like, I really did not think there was a cat in this movie. And then when a cat appears, it feels so shoehorned in and so grains against whatever it is Christoph Waltz is doing.
Listen, it looks so much like the original Blofeld cat. I don't know if they like cryogenically preserved it.
Right.
And then it's like, when we get the rights back,
we're
going to reanimate
this cat. That cat back.
I mean, it's so like the Blofeld cat. It's crazy. People might say a cat is a cat is a cat, but it's ridiculous. It is like that must have been from the same. It must have been like from
the same line, the same the lineage of that original cat.
Because if you know, like one of the great things about you know, the trio of Blofelds we had was that they all played it completely differently, yet they were all doing it with a great deal of melodrama, like a different kind of melodrama. You know, Telly Savalas was very much Al Capone. You know, I'm Al Capone. Donald Pleasance was I'm the most disturbed human being that's ever existed. You know?
Right.
Dr. Loomis plus, and you know, Charles Gray was the most, you know, suave. The suavest, you know, Blofeld or villain you'll ever get. But neither of them are sort of like trying to integrate this character into a plausible reality in a way that I think Mendes and the screenplay and Waltz are trying to do. Like they want
that's the thing, is
a credible Blofeld to go along with their credible Bond.
Yeah.
And we don't need that.
It's what I noticed on this viewing is how much nothing works. So the dialogue and the script is not working. The directing is not working whenever we're on Christoph Waltz. I'm sad to say, because I just love him so much as an actor, Christoph Waltz himself is not working. Wardrobe's not working.
And he's a very funny man if you see him in interviews.
Yes.
Like there's really no excuse. It's not like
he's funny enough that
he's just funny when Tarantino's directing him. Like
he's funny enough that like Jerry Seinfeld had him on Comedians
and
in
he's
Cars
hilarious.
Getting Coffee. Yeah,
absolutely hilarious. That the going to IHOP and saying, you know, I seen it from the freeway. I thought it was cheap shoes. You know, he's a very funny man.
Such a great line.
It is. Thought it was cheap shoes. But it's and it's and you know, we talk about this again. I mean, he's not really in the next movie as a villain, but you at least get a sense of, again, some of the madness. You know, it's like you get sanity. You just get that in the next film, but I would have taken a bit more in this one.
Yeah. Just saying the word, just saying cuckoo was not enough.
And you know, it's really interesting because in terms of Bond villains that he reminds me of, and we can again talk about this next time, it's Michael Lonsdale's Drax all the way. And his, I don't know if it's a specific reference, but the Spectre, you know, the information center looks a hell of a lot like the launch bay in Moonraker.
Yeah, right.
And he's dressed that kind of, I know that, you know, that is way more Michael Lonsdale than other Blofelds, the way he's dressed.
Yeah.
So, and his is one of the most restrained Bond villains, and it works because Michael Lonsdale's fantastic, and There's nothing else in the film that's worth saying. So
See, but it's funny because I think part of it is that it compounds a problem for the movie, because the franchise has been waiting so long for Spectre and Blofeld to come back that once you reintroduce them and they're underwhelming, it drags the movie down further. It's a problem for the movie.
And also the idea that, given that the movie is called Spectre, that we would ever think he was anyone other than Blofeld.
Yeah, right.
The movie is kind of presupposes that we're being strung along, and only when he says what his actual name, it's like, well, he has to, it's like, this movie's called Spectre.
Yeah.
And Spectre,
I know who I'm gonna see.
Yeah. And
speaking to what we were saying earlier about, there's not a real sense from the actors that like raises their brother, their familial relationship, to the surface. I'll give the movie one bone.
Oh, bone away.
And maybe even Sam Mendes a bone. I don't really care so much about the in shadow shots, and then Blofeld finally turns and looks at James Bond. But the underneath shot of him on the balcony, even in the bathed in gold still, Daniel Craig, the dawning, like when he sees Blofeld for the first time in that moment.
At the funeral, you mean?
No, at the meeting.
Because I really like how it's done at the funeral. I wish they didn't do it.
You're right. I really like that moment too, actually.
Because that's as sinister as he gets in the entire film.
Yeah.
Because you really like, again, that note of half recognition from Bond and from him.
Yes.
Says more about their familial connection.
But also with his back turned to him, it's almost like he can feel him there.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm talking about when they're at the meeting, the Spectre meeting, and there's just one shot that I think more than anything is a good piece of acting from Daniel Craig. I kind of see his childhood pass before his eyes when he sees him. I did like that one moment.
That's good. I overall quite like that sequence. I wish it wasn't as wooded as
right.
It is. I think that they were trying too hard to go to de-technologize the Blofeld. I mean, it's worth nothing because you've got electronic needles going into his brain.
Right.
But
and also because like with Hanks, you have the nails into the eyes, and you think that's going to be his thing, and they never come back.
No, that never comes back to it. No. It's always, and again, and this is another weird storytelling thing. But I'm always amazed how shocked the Scooby Gang are that someone who is officially dead could be alive. Like, you're spies. Don't you come across this stuff all the time?
Right.
Like, faking your death is like one of the main things that spies do, right?
Yeah. No, James, there's no way he's alive. I know he's dead.
So let's talk about the Scooby Gang.
Yeah.
Because this is where the Craig Bond films become an ensemble piece.
Mm-hmm.
They're all established in Skyfall, and there's a little bit of ensemble work, but it's still pretty much just M and
right.
Which is M and Bond at the end. But here, they carry the last act of the film, and they're present throughout. Really, there's no period of the film where they're not working as a team or a unit. And I just wondered what you thought about them as characters, and what you thought about this idea of like Bond having a team around him. I kind of
like that. I mean, I
do too.
I like the idea that James Bond, at least ostensibly in this film, he knows better than M what to do. And it's funny because 10 minutes later, M's basically on his page anyway.
Plus, there's no scene. Something I noticed on this. I'd always Mandela affected a scene in which M realizes that Bond's right, and doesn't exist.
No, yeah.
He just leaves that restaurant in a huff.
Yeah, right.
And then the next time we see him, he's working for Bond.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But I did kind of like that the acknowledgement that within going rogue, James needs some help.
yeah.
And I had forgotten that he got his smart blood,
The nanobots
the
started.
nanobots.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that too. I was all, I was 100% down on No Time to Die for its nanobots
Yeah, exactly.
storyline, but it all
Because there's
starts
a
here.
connection
So
between the two.
Spectre again is to blame.
Right. And so you have the nanobots, but I forgot that that happened at all. And then I also forgot that it's that veneer of James kind of saying, great, on board, love it. But it's 30 seconds later when he says, I need your help. I need you to help me disappear.
Yeah.
And it's funny that, like, not enough really happens within the scope of Skyfall for Q and Moneypenny to so readily come to his side. But this movie makes me believe that they believe.
That's what, again, that's, you talk about two ideas graining against each other.
Uh-huh.
If you could have created a timeline in which Bond had been working with these people for a while,
right,
in between these two movies,
because that's how it feels,
and had it had like a series of adventures, but they want to be an aftermath sequel to Skyfall so much,
right,
that it's like, it seems like it's days or weeks after the end of Skyfall.
And there's also little things I like. I like Moneypenny getting her the phone. I like the bottle of champagne being left, because it shows that James Bond can get past all of their security, whether it's at her home or more specifically in Q's little lair there, that he could get past all of it and leave that for him and steal a car. It's a cutesy way of showing how good he is at what he does. And actually, there's one moment that I'll give Sam Mendes credit on as well. There's one moment towards the end of this movie, towards the first climax of this movie, that I have always really liked and I have always remembered. And it's when, he throws his stupid watch bomb that Blofeld doesn't see coming, and they get out of the building, and James Bond takes one gun, shoots some people, and gets a second gun
very slowly.
And the distance with which he has to shoot people, like, a lot of times in movies, the bullets are flying close to our hero, and that scene has that too. But within it, to me, there's a real moment of seeing the precision with which James Bond works, that he can still and calm himself enough. And that's what you need in that moment, to shoot a guy who's like 150 yards away from you. I've always really liked that in this movie. I mean, it's a small thing, but I've always appreciated it. And so those small things, have spoken to the James Bond character for me in a way that I kind of like in this movie.
And at the time, I think that was the biggest explosion done on film.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive.
Which again is, I think I agree with you. Some people,
and that's a funny thing, because
Bond working with the Scooby Gang, I've never had that issue. I don't think they need an extra 20 minutes of the movie just to sort of to show them working together as an ensemble.
Yeah, right.
It's like I'm fine having them threaded through the way that they are in more of the movie than the tradition, than his, than the intelligence services usually are in Bond films. Like, I'm fine with that. I don't need 20 minutes added onto the film unnecessarily to show that they work that they're now a unit. And for that, and
also because you've set up this
resigning and that, so it's never going to be that again.
Well, and you've also set up this B story that's, I guess, wrapped up in the A story, because Andrew Scott C is working with Spectre, I guess because he doesn't believe in something as silly as democracy. But so the movie feels like it has to wrap up that storyline.
I mean, yeah, and that's worth mentioning. There are other villains apart from Blofeld in this film,
right?
first of all, we've got Mr. Hinks,
Mhm.
Dave Bautista as the large henchman.
Now, what do you make of that fight in the train?
I mean, it's good combat, but
Because it's done well, but it also feels derivative.
Sure, I think it's acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the more memorable action sequences in the film.
That's true.
But I mean, I just think like he is there as a type. It's one of those moments where they sort of feel like they understand the trope, but not
right.
Why it works, or
yeah,
in what way you need to use it. Like, I mean, we've been a bit spoiled because we've gone from Donovan Grant to this.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the best example of this to one of the not better. But still, there's nothing, that even something as simple as Jaws has got his metal teeth. Like there's really nothing here except you either buy into.
Well, and they also abandoned what they set up. So
yeah, you either buy into the cult of Dave Bautista, or what do you? I don't know quite what you've got. Just muscle, right? I mean, it's
well,
the idea.
What do you think of him as an actor?
I haven't seen enough of his work really to comment.
Because I quite like him in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's very funny in that.
Yeah.
I remember seeing him in Blade Runner, the 2049 Blade Runner, at the very beginning. And I'm not sure I even had a sense of who he was other than a wrestler at that time when I saw it, maybe. Yeah. But thinking he's very engaging. I remember having that specific thought. And yet in this movie, I think you were just saying it feels like he's a type.
Yeah.
And that's what he's doing there.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure he rises above that.
No.
But I'm not sure that that's his fault too, because they don't give him anything interesting to do either.
Right. I think
he's not in it enough.
A little more interesting. I think weirdly the villain that really works in this film is Mr. White.
Yeah.
I think that's that section. I mean,
well, I think he's great in all the movies he's in. Yeah. I mean, he's a great actor. You know,
he played second fiddle in 2 Bond. He played villain in 2 Bond movies. So first of all, it's nice for him to sort of. I mean, he's a great actor to sort of give him give him a real big scene to do, which he does brilliantly.
Yeah.
Almost the point where you're like, God, I wish he was Blofeld.
Yeah, right.
But it's interesting because it is a little bit. So it's a little bit of a retcon.
They could have made him Blofeld. He could have been a Kaiser Soze situation.
Yeah.
You were in his presence all the time.
Because in this film he becomes a Bond ally rather than a Bond villain, and all of the basically Daniel Craig spent a film hunting him down, and that seems to have been wiped from memory, which you'd think I'd have a bigger problem with, but I kind of like I guess because it is espionage, and it's like in the reality, in if you work in espionage, you cannot have personal grudges you have to be willing to work with anyone. I guess that's the point that kind of comes across. I mean, it's, they narratively they need him to become an ally rather than a villain at this point. But I mean, the film is trying to play off this. It's trying to do this reverse double agent thing where a villain becomes an ally and an ally becomes a villain.
Yeah.
The C's story is that he's the perhaps least disguised
exactly
villain you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Doesn't help.
And I would say that
he's played by Moriarty from Sherlock, but there we go.
And I would say that
a priest who can't keep it in his pants. I
would say that they give him an underwhelming end if I didn't care about his end in the first place, but they do give him an underwhelming end.
Yeah.
Because
it's
like he shoots the glass above him and M to what the film is telling me that he's doing it to help himself. And yet it's what causes him to lose his balance and fall over the ledge.
I mean, again, if you were to break it down, I don't think anything is necessarily gained from him being in cahoots with Blofeld versus he's just he's just an ambitious.
I was gonna say it's better if he's just an ambitious guy who believes in this one thing and doesn't realize that Spectre has glommed onto it and is manipulating it.
He would still do anything to protect.
Yeah,
as we know, modern day politicians will go to any length.
Yeah,
to protect their legacy, and that would have been a much better way to go rather than sort of making him a conspirator. It didn't, because part of what drives Bond right from the Bond canon, right from the books all the way through to the end of the films, is Bond versus bureaucracy, right? It's Bond versus bureaucrats.
But in this sense, there's also a real Star Trek 3, bias against technology.
Yeah,
aspect to it as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, technology is pretty much all bad in the film, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or it doesn't work.
Because even M is saying, it's not what you think it is. It's not as great as you think.
A license to kill is also a license.
It's also a license not to kill.
Which is not the case. It's one or the other. We've talked a little bit about action sequences. I had 2 adjectives: lengthy and forgettable.
Yeah.
On the whole.
Right.
Too many in the air.
Yes.
And they seem to
and also they always speak to something we've already seen in the canon. I mean, you mentioned the snowy airplane chase. I mean, that feels very on Her Majesty's Secret Service. We're not on a bobsled, but it feels like we're in the same place,
Or For Your Eyes Only. Or
yeah, right.
There's a bit of The Spy Who Loved Me and coming up alongside the car in an airborne vehicle. And also, for some reason, like that, I think you've said that it's not a funny film. Like the humor in the film doesn't work.
Yeah,
but it seems like the humor that really doesn't work is all focused around the action sequences. Like that's when they're trying to do the most jokes.
Yeah,
that's when it's backfiring the most.
The most, right?
I mean, why they think it's funny that 009 listens to New York, New York, I'll never know.
Right.
And just, it's like you don't expect to hear that sort of conventional placeholder action movie dialogue from James Bond, weirdly. Like,
yeah, I mean, like the foreigner in his car moment.
Says, "You've got to be kidding me," right?
Yeah.
And it says, let's see what you've
when there's
got.
No bullets.
Yeah. He said, let's see what you've got. And it's like, this, this is not Fast and Furious, this is like,
yeah, right.
It's like you've write something. It's like you've got Jez Butterworth on writing staff. Like, get him to write what's he doing in this film exactly? What dialogue is he writing? Because it's not this.
Yeah.
It's so formulaic. And I just really, I dread.
Well, I always, because in the middle of that car chase, there's the moment where he's pushing the foreigner's car ahead.
Comedy Foreigner, yeah.
The Comedy Foreigner, and it just feels so. I mean, this is a 2015 film, and it just feels like they're going for what we did in the 80s with James Bond.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's so retro.
But Roger Moore did it well. That's the other part.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It feels so misplaced in this movie.
The only way you could save that sequence is that if that Comedy Foreigner like went to his glove box and got out like a bottle, drank from it, and then looked at it in surprise. Yeah. That's the only way. That's the only way you could save that sequence.
Motor oil.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. We talk all the time about big swings in sequels, right?
Mhm.
This movie has a lot. Do any of them work? So
Mhm.
Blofeld is his brother.
Right.
It's been
Spectre's behind everything.
It's been a master plan all along.
Right.
And Bond hooks up with the daughter of Mr. White,
Yeah.
who he spent a movie trying to take down. I mean, I would say that's the only one that is close to working.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean,
But you
it's
don't
at
want to
least
think about
enough
it
to
too long.
propel into the next film.
Yeah.
So
Is there any merit in that? I feel like we talk about this all the time.
But at the same time, we already talked about how the relationship in this movie wasn't earned. The script and Mendez didn't give me enough between them to make me believe.
True.
And it's funny because the actors are good together. And
they clearly are, yeah. From the evidence of the next film,
I was going to say the next film shows us that explicitly. So I blame Mendez and I blame the script on that. Because the next movie does make me believe that they've been together for a long time.
But again, like it's like the next time we see them, it's minutes after.
No,
well, not minutes. It'll be like a couple of days because they have to get to Italy from London.
No, but I always had the sense that maybe they've been there for a couple months. That
Doesn't
was
it
possible.
Pick up pretty much exactly?
Well, we just see them walking down.
Isn't it picking up when they're arriving because they get their bags taken to the hotel? I guess they could have been somewhere in between.
Yeah, but I think I remember thinking that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll get to the epilogue shortly. Let's talk briefly about music. We've talked about Writing on the Wall. It's neither of our favorites, but clearly it's an attempt to double down on Adele and how much everyone loved that. Anyway, it works. It won an Oscar.
Yeah.
Now they just keep giving Bond themes Oscars. They just waited until after they deserved them.
All you have to do is make a song and you'll win an Oscar for a Bond.
But what do you think about Thomas Newman's score more generally?
I don't remember it standing out, but I don't remember it particularly bothering me either.
It's really interesting because obviously Hans Zimmer takes over for the next film. And this feels like what you'd expect a Hans Zimmer score to sound like. And yet, when Hans Zimmer gets his hand on the Bond films, rather than like doing what he normally does with a score, he goes, "This is a Bond film. Look at all this great music we have to play with." And he just has this jukebox approach where he's like, "I want a bit of On Her Majesty's Secret Service here. I want this to sound like this. I want it to sound like a real Bond film." And yeah, if you'd have asked me which one was Hans Zimmer, I would have said this one because this Thomas Newman doing a Hans Zimmer pastiche, as far as I can tell. Apart from the times that we go to a new country and when we get this national stereotype music.
Yeah, right.
When we get to Tangiers, we hear the morning prayer call, which, begins every movie about terrorism.
Right. That's true. You're right there.
And when we get to Austria, it goes dun, 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 gets very Prussian. The sound is like, come on, we've got to be beyond this at this point in musical history. But kudos.
One would think
Hans Zimmer didn't pull a Hans Zimmer when he got his hands on the Bond film. So
no, I guess not.
It makes his work look even more impressive. Is this movie too? Well, it is. This movie's too long, right?
Way too long.
Way too long.
There's not enough content in this movie, story or character wise, to warrant it being this long.
Right, I agree.
You have a 2.5, almost 2.5 hour movie where we're explicitly saying the love story isn't shown on screen. I mean, part of that is you don't introduce one of the characters until halfway through.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself is kind of offensive, that you cannot believably bring that relationship along enough in a 2.5 hour long movie.
Yeah, because if you think about the first film we did on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the first thing we see is the two people are going to get married at the end of the movie meeting. So even though they're not always in the film together, we're at least with the building blocks of that last the entire movie. But yeah,
sure.
This is a second, third act romance. And it feels kind of like bloated around the edges as well. Like I feel like you could get away with cutting half of the cold open and the last 20 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like that would be enough, right?
That would be enough right there.
Yeah.
But on top of it, we've also already discussed that action sequences are too long.
Very long, yeah. And samey too, two helicopter, one plane.
Right.
No, I mean it's there's no reason why we
have. It sounds like two girls, one cup.
Yeah, it's like this.
Two helicopters, one plane.
There's no reason why we have to, have a action sequence on every kind of vehicle.
Yeah.
Can save it for another film.
Exactly. You want one in every kind of vehicle in each film for one man playing Bond, but you don't want them all in one movie.
Right.
You want to see James Bond on a boat. You want to see him on some skis. You want to see him in a plane, but not all in one movie.
But I think, this is the tendency to sort of over-egg the pudding at the beginning and end of the film. I think, without, I've said that, I've seen No Time to Die twice. I'll watch it again before we do our next episode, and I appreciate it far more than I did the first time I see it, but I still have an issue with how long the beginning and the ending of the film is, and I think I have the same problem here. So I don't think it's and we've talked about it, not to give it away what film we've talked about because the episode hasn't come out yet, but can you have bad habits and then get over them in enough time making the next sequel? And this is one area where I think No Time to Die sort of, because they got away with it here, and this was a hugely successful film. I mean, and it had a really good critical reaction when it came out, and then the naysayers have kind of come since then. Like I remember when this film came out, like Bond mega fans were like, this is Daniel Craig finally becoming Bond. This is the peak of the series, all that sort of stuff. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the veneer of like, this is a traditional Bond movie format. And seeing him do things that you do in 60s, 70s Bond. And when people watch it again, they realize, oh, that really is just
veneer.
Yeah. That's just a varnish. But I think, many of us, and I was more enthusiastic about the film when I first saw it than I have been subsequently.
I remember really disliking it when I first saw it.
Well, good for you. I mean, I think you're dead on there. But
I reacted poorly.
Fair enough. But I think there was a little bit of a, Attack of the Clones. This is great. And then, okay, maybe not. Let's talk about the epilogue. So we've had we've had the fourth of four climaxes. No, there's the third of four climaxes.
Right.
And then we have, a scene which, if it's not reshot, I don't know what a reshoot is. But that I actually, as a self-contained scene, I really like.
Really?
I like, it's probably the only bone I'm going to throw Sam Mendes is he or his cinematographer film this gray London morning really nicely. Like it gives me, I lived in London for about a couple of years, and it gives me the feeling of being there. Like I can,
that's good. Yeah.
I can feel how the cold air around me because of the way it's filmed. and it's the morning. There's just to see the city deserted, and I just find it very satisfying. And then this was, I think, went a long way to fool people into thinking this was a good Bond film, because I remember
that's interesting.
what people were talking about at the time was, it's great because Bond finally gets the girl after 3 movies of losing women. He finally gets the girl, and he's also he gets.
I have to admit, the final shot of them, like the camera moving this way and her looking at him.
Yeah,
I think I mentioned earlier, I thought, oh, this is a fine ending. If only it wasn't at the end of a bad movie. I really like that.
And he gets his Bond, he gets the Bondmobile back.
Gets his Bondmobile. He gets, the Bond theme is going.
And I as a self-contained scene, I really like it.
Yeah, I do too.
And I wish it's like a really difficult thing to pin down, but there's a difference between the appearance of something and the spirit of it. You know what I mean? And this feels like this is where the spirit of 60s, 70s Bond is actually on screen.
Yes, it is. You're right. Yeah.
But I don't know what the technical difference is. Because you'd think if you have like a giant henchman with broad shoulders in a suit, you'd think that should feel like
that should work, right? Yeah,
but it doesn't. And yet there's some, I don't know, there's some elixir here that brings the elements together where you go, this feels like legitimate Bond. And I genuinely think that's what people were coming out of the theater going, oh, it feels like Bond again.
Right.
But when you break down the film, you're like, oh, but Blofeld was Bond's brother, and he was a renegade all along, and he just resigned. Oh, it's the most Daniel Craig of the Daniel Craig films.
That's great.
But it's it's a real feel good ending, and it is
right.
Goose pimply.
I was actually surprised by what a feel good ending it was.
Yeah,
and it's interesting that
so tacked on as well. Like it's a shame that it's not.
And I think it speaks,
an inorganic ending, right?
Well, Leah Sadu, you were talking about her performance earlier. And we've already been talking that this movie does not raise the level of their relationship enough. But it's funny what she can do with one look at the end of this movie to make me believe that these two people belong together. And that's all her. That has,
it's at that
I'm going to
moment,
give her all the credit in the world for that.
It's at that moment, I think, that the film understands what is different about the Daniel Craig era from the traditional Bond film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, like this is where, it would have been better if he didn't land on the couch, because it's like, it's like if your expectation after 4 movies of, him getting the shit kicked out of him and every woman in his life dying is that he's going to be alone in the car. And you have this pull-up camera movement that reveals she's there with him. She stayed with him, and it's just this feel-good moment of like, wow, like it's like it's the water sex. I tell you what it is. It's the water sex moment. Isn't it?
It is.
It's water sex on dry land. It's you get that feeling because no, but it's like this is how up until a point this is how every Bond movie ended.
Yeah,
and it hasn't for a while, and it's really nice to get back to the feeling of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what people were just like, because people are generally like, traditional Bond fans were like, I really like what Daniel Craig has done for the franchise, but after 3 films, it's like, can we have a few of the traditional series pleasures kind of folded back in?
Yeah,
and this is such a great example of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just not borne out by the rest of the film. The rest of the film normally fails doing that.
Yeah, right.
So
it's funny that a not very good movie succeeds at the very end.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You don't see that often.
No, you don't. Like pulling it back in the last shot. And I think that's a reason why it was generally well reviewed when it came out, was it left you left the theater with this this good feeling.
Yeah. It still sits at 63%.
Right.
You know?
And I suppose like the next movie it ends with Bond dying, which is a bit of a downer, you know,
Yeah.
in comparison. And you know, and it's again, that's about bringing the series together, and it fits with
Yeah, sure.
with the Daniel Craig films. But if you ask me which ending I want from a Bond film, it would I mean, it'd be this, probably this on a raft, but still this.
Raft.
On
That's
near
great.
I like Bond films to end on or near a body of water.
I understand. Yes. You made it abundantly clear.
If there's one sort of missing piece of every successful Bond film, it's ending on or near a body of water.
Understood.
Well, that's all I had for talking.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
any final thoughts or anything that you didn't get to say that you wanted to say?
no, I mean, I've definitely said I mean, I wanted to get to Christoph Waltz. I wanted to talk about the female performances. I wanted to definitely talk about the yellow. And we talked about all of it. I mean, it's funny because I as I said earlier, I really disliked this movie when it first came out. And I have not liked it on subsequent viewings, but I have on this viewing, I found things that I liked more that has raised this movie from the depths of where I had it. It's still not a good movie, but there are things within it that are good.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So,
I agree with that. I think it's it's a mixed bag, but
yeah.
Overall, I just think it's
there are peaks and valleys, but I'm not sure how high the peaks go.
No, not particularly high. I think I didn't clock this before we started talking about it, but I think there are two ideas of what a Bond film is knocking against each other in a way that's unproductive for the film.
Yeah.
And you know, I sort of, it's interesting because I want to buy into the idea that, you know, this is the growth from Casino Royale, but you know that this is the
growth for the character or the franchise.
Well, no, that you know that we gradually fold in the traditional elements of the franchise as we go, and that Bond will sort of organically become a Roger Moore, Sean Connery version of Bond. I kind of like thinking of Casino Royale as like the you know, the raw material of Bond.
Yeah, right.
But the problem is, and they do, you know, obviously, like Skyfall's introduces the Scooby Gang, who, you know, are like legacy characters. So you can see that there's a definitely they're working towards that, but I think they just offset the development of that too many times. So yeah, it's like when Quantum of Solace ends, it's like, okay, we're gonna move on now. Skyfall comes out, okay, we'll take one more movie to move on, and then the end, and then Spectre starts, right, and like just one more movie, okay? By the end of this movie, we'll have.
But like I said, like now we're 4 movies deep, and it's not, you know that these actors, they can't play this role in perpetuity. So yeah, you know that at best he has one more left after that. You know, I mean, yeah, because nobody's going to allow a Roger Moore scenario happen again.
But I think
you don't want a 60-year-old man playing Bond.
But I think they want. I don't know what. I think they were hoping that it's, I don't know, at some point the edges would come off Daniel Craig's performance. But that's just not.
See, I don't know that that's true. I have more of a sense that people really, and I mean, myself,
the producers.
I know what you're saying. But I'm, you know.
I don't think that's what people respond to about Daniel Craig.
Right. I would be interested to know if that was on producers' minds. That's interesting. That's an interesting thought.
Because Casino Royale is so much of an origin story, like,
Yeah.
you know, came out around the same time as Batman Begins, and it was clearly part of the same project.
But it, you know, it's funny because they
then you know, the dark
they make the choices, Tom. They decided for Quantum of Solace to basically be an aftermath movie as well.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
You know,
that's really interesting. Yeah, one like you could couple. I mean, not as definitive. Well, God, you know, it's not that.
It's funny. You could couple it. You could couple it the first and second. You could couple it the third and fourth, but you can also obviously couple it the fourth and fifth.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Skyfall is still the only outlier, right? It doesn't refer to any other movie.
Right.
Wow.
It's crazy.
It is kind of interesting. Like, yeah. And again, it sort of tacitly makes the argument for just drawing a line under the last film and doing something else.
Right.
But which is what Skyfall did, and it was very successful at doing that. And then they decide they want to have it, bring it all together, bring everything together. Maybe it's the going back and forth that's the problem.
Well, that's what I think I meant earlier. I said earlier, I think that, or maybe I started a thought that I didn't get to finish, that maybe they would have been best served having Spectre back, waiting until Daniel Craig was done. But they felt like we got to use it.
Oh yeah, there's no way they were going to wait on that.
And so
I don't think
they insisted on trying to do this thing in which all the movies are now connected, and it didn't serve them very well. Didn't help.
Yeah, true. I think it's either or, right? It's
right.
You make that movie tying everything together, but it can't have anything to do with, you save Spectre for its own movie.
Yeah.
And doing both you're never going to get the best of both worlds out of that. That's interesting. But it's
funny that they didn't put enough story into their 2.5 hour story.
Well, there's too many set pieces, right? There's how much of this film is set pieces?
But there are also too many ideas within their story.
Yeah. Yeah.
This movie's an odd bird.
Did we also talk about, am I stupid?
Yes.
In not
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
No, still, that's a
nothing
joke.
could be
That's
further from the truth
than anything in Spectre.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
I know.
You are by far the smartest person on this podcast.
And even in my head, as I started to say that, I was going, is he going to do it? That I don't understand the scene with the fingerprints in the ring.
Oh yeah, no, no, I
How
don't.
Can you...
It makes no sense. It's as though everybody that touched that ring left a lasting impression forever.
But what? But also, why was that the same person's? Why was that a ring for all of them?
Right.
Wouldn't they all have their own ring?
Of course. But it's as though they said, well, you want to hold mine for a second? Let me see yours. Oh my gosh, they're exactly the same. Here, give me mine
like
back.
Patrick Bateman in American Psycho with the cards.
Yeah.
That's a lot of heavy.
Let me see yours, LaChief. Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Mr. Green, what do you got? Oh, they're all exactly the same. All right, there you go.
Don't hold out on me, Silver.
Yeah.
Silver's just in the corner looking camp. Oh, wow. That's a lot of heavy lifting for the viewer to do. There's got to be an easier way to figure that out.
Well, and also it's because I mean we're done, but I guess it doesn't matter. But the B story of them trying to open up this new counterterrorism, blah 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 blah, that C wanted to open, and
which is just what really exists in London.
Yeah.
Just a surveillance state. I mean, there's no dystopian element to that. That is.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
That is how we live our lives now.
But within the scope of the movie, Q is trying to shut it down. And it's the most anticlimactic thing ever. It's very difficult to just show somebody.
Well, that's why you have to have Alan Cumming flicking a pen.
Yeah, right.
Bad
Yeah,
Russian accent and shouting. He knew how to dress.
He knew how to do it.
He knew how to dress up a boring computer scene.
So
yeah.
Anyway.
But we will be back in a month's time with well, I don't think it's any secret. We can say what's next on the Watchalongs because we've been waiting a whole year.
Right, that's true.
We're going back to Endor.
Yeah.
To re-meet the Ewoks.
Good grief.
And Wilford Brimley will be there too.
That makes me more enthused.
And a whole bunch of puppets whose faces don't move. So yeah, we'll be doing the second.
We're going to a forest moon where you won't ever get old and you won't ever die.
That's right. You watch those Ewoks. You watch them close. You hear me?
Watch them close, I said.
40-year anniversary.
Yep.
So yeah, that's what we'll be doing next month. Battle for Endor. Thanks for buying me time to remember the title.
Yes, of course.
Ewoks, Battle for Endor. And then we'll be back in
December.
Yes.
We'll round out the bond.
Around Christmas, which will bring us full circle. We did this first in Christmas. We did On Her Majesty's Secret Service at Christmas. And we'll be talking about Moonraker, which is the only remaining Bond movie that has a potential continuity claim in it. And wrap up, talk about No Time to Die and wrap up our miniseries. And then we might never know if we get our act together. We might announce what we're doing next for a miniseries.
Exactly. We got to give it some thought.
Yeah. So exciting times here at the Everything Sequel podcast, and we hope you join us again.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back next month. For Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, Michael Shantz here of the How Dare You Awards. We'll see you next month with the Ewoks. Say goodbye, Tom.
Just flush it down the toilet.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Well, and watching.
Or both.
Yeah.